We're going to cut up a green bell pepper now, and we're going to do it unlike a lot of other people do. They show you very complicated ways to do this. And taking care of a bell pepper and cutting it up and dicing it should be a very easy task. So we're going to make it easy. What we're going to do is we're going to take it and we're going to cut right down the sides of it, just like this, one side at a time. Just lay it down, and we're going to cut this off, and then we're going to cut the bottom off. And then we have all the rest of it that we don't need in one piece, and we have 5 even flat segments here, and we have a clean cutting board. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our drawer, get rid of it, and now we're ready to dice. Clean cutting board, flat pieces, easy to dice. Doesn't get faster than that. What we're going to do is even cuts. And again, like so. We're cutting up vegetables for chili, so we want them a little bit on the hearty side. So we're going to go to the 1/2 inch square side, which is mostly called, in French, a brunoise. And there you go. Easy enough. Whenever you're cleaning your cutting board, remember, use the back of the knife. Like this. It doesn't dull your blade. Alright, now if you're going to slice a mushroom, you always want to slice one end off first and then roll it over to the flat side. It's always easier to cut up anything, no matter what it is, with the flat side down. It's very difficult to cut things that are round. They move. If they move, you're using a sharp knife, it's easy to draw blood. You don't want to do that. So, like so, and then roll it over. Notice I keep the edge of the knife down so that it's the minimum amount of noise. You see any woodpeckers in the kitchen? You don't want that. That's not professional. In professional kitchens, you don't see that. It's not necessary and it's not needed. Extra noise in the kitchen, that's up to the chef to be yelling at everybody, so you want to make sure you can hear them. And like so. Nice even cuts. Dicing an onion. First thing you want to do, cut off the end. Now when you cut off the end, make sure that the entire stem is gone. The stem is wood. You can break your tooth on wood. You do not want that part. You're not saving money. Get rid of it. Flip it over. Take care of the other top. Split it in half. Again, always keep your cutting boards clear and clean. Get rid of this outside peel and layers. This is woody. This is harsh. You don't want that in your chili or your soups. And again, likewise, peel that outside layer off. Make sure you get rid of it. Nice clean onions, good flavor, nice and sweet. That's what you want to dice with. Whenever you're cutting anything, always make sure flat side down so you got an easy surface to cut with and it doesn't move on you. You're going to take your knife, you're going to run it across the onion a couple of times. You're not going to cut all the way through, but you're going to slice just short of the end, just like this, so that there's just enough onion holding it together for you. Then, once you've got a couple of slices this way to even it out, you're going to come back and go vertically through the onion. Now you've got even cuts this way and even cuts this way, and you'll get yourself an even dice. And then the last piece that's holding everything together, we dice it up, and we're all done. I'm going to cut once, and we're going to cut twice. Notice I didn't cut all the way through, it's still held together. And again, we're going to slice it almost to the end. Keeping your fingers clear. And get the little edge there. And then we come back. And again, even cut all the way to the end. Okay, now we're ready to start our Cajun rice. Our pan is getting hot. And what we're going to do is we're going to add our oil first. We're using corn oil. We don't need much because we're using non-stick pans. Start off with our corn oil, make sure that this covers the bottom of it. And we're going to add our onions first. Always add the onions away from you to prevent splattering. You don't want to be splattered. Give them a little bit of a stir. Move them around a bit. There's no need to pick up the skillet and do this when you're using a flat surface and an induction plate. Okay? Next, after the onions have got a start, we're going to add our poblano peppers. Now we don't have to wait too long for the onions because the poblano peppers, the walls on them are a little thin. They're not like green bell peppers. They're not as thick and they're not quite as dense. So we can actually add them almost at the exact same time. without much of an issue. And we want our onions to cook until they're translucent. We want our poblano peppers likewise to cook nice and all the way through, thoroughly done. To speed up the process, we'll put our lid on, and we'll be back to that in just a second. Okay, now we've got our onions and our peppers started, and we've got some nice brown color to them to give them that little bit of the Cajun bite. You only need to add your garlic at the very end. Get it hot in the oil. That'll bring the flavor of the garlic out. You don't need to do much more than that. And if you were here, you'd be able to smell that garlic flavor. It's all over the place already. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add our water. We heated it up to speed things along. And we're going to add our seasonings that are already measured out. So we make this a nice quick segment. And we're going to add our tomato paste. And we're going to add a half a can. And we're going to stir this in. Now we've got our tomato paste added, our vegetables are in here and they're all sauteed, and we've got our seasonings added to the broth. And this is about to come to a boil. As soon as this comes to a boil, we're going to add our rice, which is literally happening right now. Now, here's the mistake that most people make when you're doing rice pilafs. In restaurants, we never boil our rice on the stovetop for two reasons. One, we don't generally have the space to do that. And number two, when you boil your rice, the starch comes out of the rice. This is what makes it into a sticky, gooey mess. We do not want that boiling action where the water is simmering and moving around. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the rice now that it's come to a boil. And we're going to just stir it gently so it's moved around, so all the seasonings are moved around and they're nice and consistent, and they're throughout the entire broth along with the rice itself. And this is going to come to literally a simmer within seconds. You can see this happening already. Now as soon as this starts to simmer just a little bit more, what we're going to do is we're going to put a lid on this. We're going to take the whole thing, we're going to put it right in the oven. And we're going to bake it until all the juices are gone. When all the juices are gone, it is done. Generally speaking, for this batch, it's going to be about 20 minutes at 375. Okay, now that we have it on the counter, always make sure that you're handling it with a dry towel. Not a damn towel, not a pot holder. Pot holders are dirty and you can't clean them. Use a towel. It covers your hand. Get anything wet on it, you spill on it, you can get rid of it right away and save your hand a bad burn. So now what we're going to do is we're going to position this, open up the lid. Oh, look at that. And we give it a stir, and look at this. Just like that, we have a nice batch of Cajun rice. All those little seasonings and whatnot that came up to the top, we just stir it right back in. You can see how the rice is nice and separated, and it's not stuck in lumps and it breaks apart, and it's cooked, and all the moisture is gone. Perfect. Okay, now we're going to get serious. We're going to make jambalaya. One of the great myths about jambalaya is that you have to have a roux in order to thicken it. You do not need a roux. A roux only masks the taste of the flavors that are in the jambalaya. It's not necessary to use a roux. And we're going to do a jambalaya today with no roux and no thickening agents. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take our andouille sausage and our ham, we're going to saute them off, and we're going to brown them in our skillet. While our sausage and our ham is browning, we are going to saute off our vegetables at the same time in our main skillet. So we're going to use a little bit of olive oil to coat the bottom of the skillet to get it all started in the right direction. We don't need much. We love the flavor olive oil gives our food. Olive oil is very, very healthy for you. Not only for your skin, but also for your arteries as well too. We're going to start off like we always do with our hardest vegetable first. In this case, once again, it's going to be the celery. We get our celery started. We check our meat. See how it's rendering really nice. We don't want to overload our skillet. Make sure that we toss it regularly so it browns in its own fats. Remember, the fats from the sausages add a lot of flavor to our jambalaya. We really do want that. A great story I have about my recipe for jambalaya is a waitress that I used to work with by the name of Katie saw that I had jambalaya on the menu for a special for the following day. She grew up in New Orleans. She came up to me and she said, "I'll tell you if it's any good." I said, "Sure thing." Well, the following day, Katie came in for her shift. When she came in for her shift, she ordered jambalaya for lunch, and I saw the order come into the kitchen. Well, right after lunch, I noticed that Katie was making herself scarce during the course of our shift. So I walked up to her finally, and I caught her at the waitress station putting in an order, and she couldn't get away from me. And I asked her, I said, well, Katie, how's that jambalaya doing you? And she said something like, well, I'm not quite sure what that meant, but I'm pretty sure she meant best I ever had. Now, when I asked her to clarify that and say that slower and in English, it came out to best I ever had. Now, I've had some friends on the south side taste my jambalaya who grew up down in Nawlins, and they have told me to my face, who the hell can cook? Now, I'm telling you, this is an excellent recipe for jambalaya. You will not be disappointed. Once our celery and our bell peppers are cooked enough to add our onions, we do so. Just stir them in. Make sure that we don't have any scorching spots. Everything is cool. Once again, the whole idea, cook it quick, cook it fast, bring all your flavors out nice and clear and clean. Same thing here. Sweating our sausages, get them nice and brown. Let them simmer in their own juices and their own oils. Gives them a really nice, healthy flavor. Again, we're using sausages by Leon's, and we're also using sausages by Amy Lou. Chicken sausages and pork sausages. We're using a combination of andouille sausages for this particular recipe. Very, very nice stuff. But I suggest that you use your own favorite brand of andouille sausage when you're making it so it tastes more like something that you want. Because after all, at this point in time, it's your recipe. All right. Vegetables are cooking quickly. The meat's doing nicely. And it's almost time to add the mushrooms. Now we're going to add the mushrooms now. We're going to put a lid on this to speed up the cooking process. Always keep the work area clear. Anything that you don't need should be removed from the area. Now, a jambalaya, say for example you're not a meat eater, you don't want meat. Substitute the red meat, the ham, and the andouille sausage for chicken, like we did with the chicken sausages. You can even put roast turkey in this, maybe even roast duck. It's completely up to you. You can ad-lib with this recipe and you can do wonders with it. Very durable, very shelf steady. And you won't be disappointed with the amount of seasonings that are in there. Now, I had alluded to earlier that we do not need a roux to thicken this. There's going to be a couple of things that are going to thicken this all on their own. Number one, we're not using anything that's really going to thin it down. Everything by itself has got a pretty thick consistency. But we're also going to be using gumbo filet. Gumbo filet is sassafras leaves. Gumbo filet can be used as a thickening agent unto itself. Also, we are using frozen okra. Now you can see the consistency of the okra. It looks like it's almost slimy. Like on some foods, if you see a slime like that, you'd think that it was spoiled. But here with the okra, when it's been frozen like this, what happens is the starches of the okra come out of it, they bleed out of it, and this will also help thicken our jambalaya. This does not give us the need for a roux. A roux, flour and oil, coats your taste buds and makes it harder for you to taste everything else that you're making. So in my book, why do you want to impair your taste buds when you're making something to eat? There we go. The mushrooms are about halfway done. The sausages are well on their way to being done. And we're getting ready to finish this up. Again, in a matter of minutes, it's going to be done very quickly. Now, in this particular recipe, we're going to use cooked shrimp. We're going to add them dead last. And we're also going to add dead last our crayfish tail meat. Now, the crayfish tail meat we have here has already been skinned and shelled. And it's been cleaned, but we have the fats from the crayfish meat. So that is really good because it's going to add some extra oomph to it, man. New Orleans flavor going into it. So that's really cool. That's something that we want. Sometimes when jambalaya is made, the crayfish tails are actually still in the shell itself. I prefer not to do that because it's just sort of like getting in the way of the actual eating. I'm leaving the tails on the shrimp, as you can see here, as a garnish because it's going to look nicer on the plate for presentation. And also, too, if anyone wants to eat them, they can actually do finger food out of it. Very, very simple and to the point. Okay. Mushrooms are ready to rock and roll. We're going to add our garlic. You see our camera crew is rubbing their stomachs already, going, ooh, when are we going to start eating that? All right. You know what time it is? It's time to add everything else. It's that quick. We're going to add our tomato juice and our diced tomatoes. Now we're going to add our tomato puree. And we're going to add our seasonings. I'm going to stir this in. And we're going to have just enough room to put everything in here. It's going to be tight, but we're going to have just barely enough room to do this. You can see how thick this is already. We're not going to really add anything to this at this point. It's going to thin it down. In fact, if anything, it's going to get a little bit thicker. So this is going to be a nice, hearty meal. Notice how that sassafras turned the tomato products a darker color. A lot of times in Cajun cooking, we like to use brown bruise that gives it a nicer, darker color when it comes to the tomato products. In this particular recipe, that's not necessary, because the sassafras leaves from gumbo filet will do that job for us. And you can see it's time for us to add our meat. The sauce is already simmering. We add everything, all the juices and the fats. This is not a healthy dish. Always turn your flames off when you return your skillets to the fire. You don't want any burning pots sitting behind you when you're on camera. Hello. Always want to make sure that whenever you splash, you clean up right away, so the cleanup job later on doesn't take as long. And also, too, your wife is a lot less likely to get mad at you when she comes home and finds there's no mess. We're going to put our lid back on this, give the edge of the pan a wipe, keep everything nice and clean and organized. We're going to be ready for some serious eating. We're going to serve this with some black beans, and we are going to serve this with some Cajun rice. Both recipes that you have on this DVD. Now, if you need more information or anything else along these lines as far as the cooking styles go, feel free to visit me at freecookingprograms.com. If you're in the Chicagoland area, you can find out where my classes are being held. Feel free to attend. Also, too, at my website, you will find videos, slideshows, recipes, and a lot of other cool stuff going on. So please, come on, drop on by, say hello. Now we're ready to add everything else. Take the top off and we see that we're simmering. And we're ready for our crayfish tail meat. Make sure we get all those juices in there. Yeehaw, yeah, that's even. Now we're going to put our shrimp in and our okra. Put our lid back in place. And we're going to be very careful when we mix this and put it all back in. Because we have just enough room to do this. That's what you call cutting it by the seat of your pants. You can see how thick and rich this is, that there's absolutely no need for a roux for something that's this thick. A lot of times when I go out, I'll go and I'll order a jambalaya when I see it's on the menu. This gives me a good gauge of how good the chef in the kitchen really is, what kind of skills and mechanics that he has working for him. And I've never seen him do it like this. Hello, my name is Michael Niksic, and I'm going to show you how to handle your knives. We're going to sharpen them, and we're also going to show you how to buy and how not to buy. We're going to get into knife handling techniques and information that you need to know about knives in general. First thing, when you go out to buy your knife, you want to make sure that the rivets go all the way through the hock, which is the handle. You also want to make sure that your blade and your hock go all the way through the handle to the back end. You don't want it to stop in here. This is a very, very well balanced knife, stainless steel tempered, and this is a buck knife. You can see how well balanced it is. Bad knives are knives where your knuckles don't clear. What happens is, when your knuckles don't clear with a knife, your knuckles hit the cutting board and you can't get a true cut. So you don't want a blade where your knuckles interfere. So that's why you always want to check your knives before you buy them. Get them in your hand and see how they fit. I always recommend against buying a complete set of knives because invariably what happens is during the course of handling all the knives that are in the set, some of them won't fit your hand. You'll notice that this buck knife here is set up one way in particular. You'll see that this Chicago cutlery knife is set up in another. Notice how my knuckles clear very easily on the cutting board, so I don't have to bounce my knuckles off when I'm cutting anything. Also, too, the other thing about cutting on your cutting board is the knife should lay flat like this. There shouldn't be any ridges, and you should be able to rock it with a French knife. Now, when it comes to your knives, and you're going to sharpen them, you never ever take your knife and sharpen towards your hand like this. That is dangerous. This particular steel was gotten from a cutlery company. If you will notice right here, all the gouges and tears that are on it. This is from a restaurant. This was handled by professionals. And you can see all the times they missed and tore up this handle. You can also see how small this guard is. Now when you have it right here with so many tendons and veins and arteries and ligaments right in this area, if you miss with a sharp knife, you can splice right in here and do severe damage to your hand. Never ever use a steel like this. Stand over a counter like this and go away from yourself. What you want to do is start at the bottom of the steel, then work your way to the top. 20-degree angle. Start at the bottom and go to the way to the top. A sharp knife can only have its blade straightened, so it becomes sharper by being straightened. If you have a dull knife and you take a steel to it, now you have a dull knife with a straight edge. You never take your blade and bang it on this. When you see people hitting it, that's bad. It should be a nice, smooth action on both sides. If you cannot straighten out your blade in 4 to 5 swipes on each side, you have a dull knife. And that's an issue that we're going to get to in a second. Now, when you're checking out your steels, a metal steel, if it's got a very, very smooth outside finish, this is really bad. You don't want that. If it's ceramic, smooth is good. But if it's metal, smooth is bad. What you want is grooves right here. You hear this. See that? Those are the grooves. This is a nice steel. This is still in really good shape. So when you're sharpening your knife, you're going away from yourself. You only do it 4 or 5 times on each side. The reason you do that is because the more you take a blade and it bends back and forth like this, the more likely it is for the very small edge of the blade, where it's very sharp, to crack off from metal fatigue. And then you just made a sharp knife dull. You don't want to do that. Now, one of the myths that we're going to bust is honing stones. First off, there's no need to buy honing stones from expensive restaurant supply companies. Go down to Ace Hardware or Home Depot and pick one up for $8. Second thing, 2 sides, one is fine, one is coarse. What you want to do is never use oil. Oil will clog the stone. You want to use water. Water will evaporate, the surface will powder, you'll be able to blow the surface off, and you'll be able to start all over again. When you're sharpening your knife on it, what you want to do is very, very simple. Again, the same as the steel. You start with the bottom of the hock, and you work from one corner of the stone to the other end of the stone. Always try and use as much of the surface of the stone as absolutely possible. This way, it'll prevent the stone from wearing like this, and it'll make it easier for you to continue sharpening your stones for the course of the life of the stone itself. And it'll also do a better job of sharpening your knife. Now, when you go to the store and you're going to buy a vegetable peeler, which one do you want? Do you want this really cool one for $8, or do you want this one for $1? Well, the answer is you want the one for $1. And here's why. You can't sharpen this one. You just bought an $8 disposable vegetable peeler is what you did. Notice, the only way you're going to be able to do this is on this side, you can flatten the edge, but now you can't get to the inside with your steel. The dollar model, you can flatten this side, and then you can flip it over, and with the tip of your steel, you can get the inside. And now, you just straighten out the edge of your $1 vegetable peeler, and it's going to last 6 or 7 times longer than this. You pay $1 for this, you spend $8 for this. You tell me which one makes more sense. Okay, now, everyone should have one of these in their house. This is a really silly one, but it works really well. Get yourself a Ginsu knife. This thing is perfect for doing all the rough jobs in the kitchen. It's inexpensive, and it handles everything nicely, and it's good for slicing bread. Nice serrated edge. Very, very, very useful in the kitchen. Now, you'll notice that sometimes you'll see chefs with knives that are worn. Well, there's a reason for this. Good flexibility, excellent for skinning fish, getting around bones when we're cutting meat. This blade's been worn down a bit. This is a butcher's knife. You can see where it actually started all the way down here. This is ground down halfway from its original thickness. Knives like this are also excellent for cutting pastries because there's less drag when you cut through the pastry. So there's less of the pastry sticking to the knife to tear up the pastry. For example, buttercream sticking to it, or a cheesecake. Very, very hard to take care of when you're cutting it with a thick knife like this, or even a knife like this. You want to use thin knives like this where less resistance, especially when you're cutting blocks of cheese. Same thing, thinner knives like that, less resistance, less drag, give you a cleaner cut every time. Now finally, what we're going to do on our list is a couple of other things. Things to straighten out the blade. Now we've already gone over the steel. This is another little device. This straightens out the edge of it. This has got a little ceramic vertical edge in here, and what we're going to do is we're going to start at the hop and go through it a couple of times. What this does is it gets all the burrs out, and it makes it a lot easier to make it straighter and cleaner and much sharper. Now we're going to show you a couple of things that can actually sharpen the blade and straighten the edge at the same time. Now this isn't an answer to sharpening your knife completely, but it helps a lot, especially if you're at a barbecue or maybe a picnic or something like that. Bringing one of these with is really helpful. Camping trip. This one's got a composite. This has diamond dust in it. It actually has a coarse and a fine grinding wheel in it, and it has 3 of them combined. Nice angles, does the job nicely, very, very good. Another version of this is a restaurant model. This also has 2 composite blades in it. And what we do is we just take our knife and run it right through it, and that also, too, gets the burrs out of it. Okay, now you're going to see how do you check your knife to see if it's as sharp as it can possibly be. Well, there's a couple of things that we're going to do. First one is we're going to put it on a grinder. This is how I take care of mine here because I have a professional grinder. The grinders that they have today are much better than what they had in the past. The reason is they're using composite stones. They're ceramic. They're really, really good, and they do the job nicely. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this knife and we're going to put it on here for a couple of seconds, and then we're going to give it a test, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to test it with a piece of paper. Now you'll know how well this is done by running your knife through a piece of paper. Now we're not going to do it on a cutting board like you would normally think. We're going to do something a little bit different. First thing we're going to do is we're going to run it up and down our steel, straighten out the edge. And then we're going to hold the paper like this. You're going to take the knife, put it between your fingers, not through your hand. Notice how that pulled through and it didn't hang on anything? There was no snags. That's what you're looking for to see if your knife has been sharpened properly. If you take your knife and you run it through a piece of paper and it hooks and snags, that's where the burr is. It just told you where the problem is exactly from where it snags. That's the part you take care of when you take it back to the stone and get that little burr off of it. So if you ever have any damage to your knife, or you take a chunk out of it by accident, chopping a chicken bone, or it whacks into a beef bone or something like that, maybe hits the counter, drops on the floor, whatever the case may be, and you start grinding it down to get that out of there, this is your test to see if you got everything out of it. It's the paper test. Just holding it up in your hand and doing that. Now you know you got a sharp knife. Okay, now you got your knife sharp. How do you keep them sharp? Storage. First thing you want to do is consider using a magnetic rack. Magnetic rack keeps them flush, prevents knife damage on the blade. Also, too, it keeps them separated. Now, if you take your knives and you store them in a drawer, that's an easy way to cause an accident in your home. A real easy way. Reaching into the drawer, digging around for the knives, not only can you get stuck by another knife, but also, too, with the knives banging back and forth, it dulls them up real good, and it also chips up the handles. Bad storage method. Number 2, if you've got a block at home and you take your knives and you shove them into the block, that's not a very good method either, because you can never clean the insides of the slots. Once you have them, they are dirty for good, and you can never get them clean. So having them in a block like that is not a very good method of storage because they're constantly dirty. Another thing that you can do to keep your knives clean is to have what we call a knife rack in the restaurant business. That's basically a box that bolts to the wall and the knives slide in the box and they hang loose. That's a better method than this one if you have children because it protects the children better. Another way you can do it is also too have the knife rack like this on the inside of your door if you have enough room. That way you can get to them and access them very, very easy.